Tonight we meet to reflect upon music, painting, speech itself as the triune path to God. How strange it might seem to raise this subject, this topic, this question. Speech today has fallen into the night, an age of obscurantism. Speech is no longer expression of thought. It is no longer seen, recognized for what it is by nature. Speech is now an instrument, deemed such, an instrument of alienation from nature. An instrument of alienation of and from music and painting. What we have in our age is a music that does pretty much the opposite of what it does by nature. A corrupt music. Painting does not fare any better. We have garbage. What we have is a mechanistic approach to painting. Painting and music have been cut off from thought. Thought as something primarily divine. What is it that connects us all? It is the machine, so we are told, so we are raised to assume. Here is someone speaking, communicating with an audience on the other side of the screen. We're speaking, we're listening, as if we were all situated on parallel universes in other galaxies, each one in his own universe. What is it that connects us? Machines. The notion that what connects us is not at all a machine, but thought. That without thought, all of these machines provide but a fake connection, a deadly one at that. A murderous one. This notion is inimical to the current regime, which very often effectively demonizes thought. How does it demonize thought? Well, it tells you that we cannot know other people's thoughts. We cannot communicate really substantively. We only have facades meeting other facades. How can I know what someone else is thinking? Well, of course I could know if speech were an articulation of thought. But of course I cannot know if speech is but an articulation of the forces of history, of evolution, the mechanisms of the flow of things, of chance, of blind necessity. If there is no God, there is no real communication. And by God here, what is meant is plain. A thought that ties all things together, that ties all of us as persons together. So, in the name of that thought, in the name of that God, let us meet today or tonight. Let us listen, let us speak in the name of a light that shines in the dark. Music, painting, speech. How are these three poles of human life ordered by nature? Let us begin as human beings with music. The first speech is music. Not, to be sure, the music we have today, but a music that any parent will have heard. Baby's sound. Ancient languages are quite musical. Take, for instance, Old Chinese, or whatever we call Chinese, since the word Chinese comes from the name of a dynasty. But it is very musical. It is so musical, it is very hard to discern words if you're a foreigner, if you're not used to the musical character of the language. Intonations, just as in music. Ah, 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 ah. Music. What is music? If we see that this which binds all things together is thought, music must then be a manifestation, an articulation of thought. Why would thought articulate itself musically? Music naturally is the enemy of noise, of chaos. Music is the ordering of life toward a proper end. Music is a movement of the soul. It represents that movement, if you like. It is, in fact, that movement. The soul moves, it produces music. Music is that movement. How it manifests itself. Whom does it manifest itself to? To thought. Thought hears itself musically. The music of the spheres, would say the ancient Pythagoreans. The music of the universe. We do not hear it. God does. Music. Music is a movement. Music is a process. But every process has a moment of certainty. There where music stops, the proper form of music. At every moment, music stops. At every moment, it ends up in a form. That form is what painting attends to. Painting is the forming of the form, of the limit of music. Music ends in painting. Painting attends to that end. The painter does. And so painting is closer to thought itself than music is. That is why Leonardo da Vinci would emphasize the superiority of painting over music. Painting is more philosophical, one might say. Music prepares us for the end of music, the proper form of music, which is attended to by the painter. That form, that certainty, is now exposed, opened up by the painter in painting as not merely nothing, right? No sound, but as a mirror of the truth about music. A mirror that invites a turn to the source of all music. Now, in that mirror, through painting, music tends to abstract itself in what we call speech. Or rather, it tends to convert into a movement of forms mediated by painting. The note is now a word. It is not tied to, shall we say, physical motion, as it is in the case of ordinary music. That is to say that the voice, the speech, musical speech of the child now becomes something more rarefied, something that is more readily serving the end of thought's self-recognition, thought returning to itself, thought seeing itself. This is not something that ordinary music achieves fully. So, through the forms of painting, which is to say, by our attending to the end of music, the concrete, certain end of music, by giving shape to it, we prepare a transformation of music. Music is raised to the status of what we would call ordinary language, ordinary speech. So we have a musical process that is losing some of ordinary music's capacities, function, in order to acquire, or in order to develop a capacity to reflect music's source. Now, you can have, of course, as we do have it today, especially in the modern world, progressively in the modern world, a corruption of speech. This happens where speech is no longer articulated as a pointer to the source of music, to thought itself. It is no longer articulated as a manifestation of divine thought, but as a mechanism of empowerment, which is to say, of alienation from the source of music and of painting. When speech is alienated from its original source, we have a dead speech, a fake speech. We have an empty shell. Words like cash, used by mercenaries to alienate the young, alienate thought from itself. Language as a trap. And we have professors rejoicing, proclaiming that it is great, that language is a maze, a labyrinth, and we can become the experts, the masters within this labyrinth. Acclaimed, famous experts. In this situation, what happens to music? What happens to painting? Music, at this point, is supposed to be the inflaming, the fueling of the delusion of the self. Well, we don't call it delusion, we call it self-realization. What happens in our world is that wherever thought arises, consciousness, it is trapped by speech, by a corrupt mechanistic discourse, to remain within itself as a determination within a world, a mechanical, mechanistic world, shaped, controlled by this fake discourse. This determination of consciousness, of thought, that is trapped within this world of mechanical discourse is what we call me, myself, I, the ego, moi, the Cartesian self. Consciousness trapped by mechanistic discourse, even a scientific method. Imprisoned, trapped. How can it free itself? By recovering a speech, by being touched by a speech that is true, that is not, no longer, the mechanistic one that imprisons us, that imprisons thought as a self, but one that exposes the self as a mirror of thought. Now, what does this mean? It means that when we say we speak, it is thought that speaks in us. And thought is what connects us. That is how you, on the other side of the screen, on the other side of another screen, can understand, can partake, can begin to understand, right? Can partake in the understanding of a message. That is how we can understand the message in a telematic bottle, independently of how much time, how much physical distance there comes to be between the writing and the reading. Music, the fueling today of the passions. Painting. Painting is often seen today as, promoted even, as self-expression. Again, the reassertion, the confirmation of the authority of this self, an authority of a self that is crippled because it's a social atom. It is trapped within a world determined by a market mercenary language. So this self that is supposed to be expressing itself, right, as if in a vacuum, is controlled by a market. And then it decries its condition haplessly, without recognizing that it is but originally, but by nature, but a manifestation of divine thought. Oh, yes, we can dream about that, but we're still trapped. And we abide by the dogmas of the market. Communication is mediated by the machine, not by thought itself, not by divine thought. So we cannot know each other's thoughts and so forth. Relativism, subjectivism, all of this is poison for mind, for thought, for the essence of our being human. Painting. Attending to the form of things. But painting does not give you God. It gives you a certain form, a form that is compatible with our condition, our being not God itself, himself. A form that can help us reflect on the source, on our own foundation, on our roots, our own life. Painting, essential to human flourishing. Music, essential to human flourishing. Music prepares us for painting. Painting prepares us for a speech that is by nature a mirror of thought, pure mirror of thought. However, it carries with it the possibility, even the likelihood, of a corruption, whereby speech now is no longer the mirror of the original dignity of music and painting, of the movement and form, the way and form of human life. Speech, corrupt speech, is now alienation from that source, from that dignity. And so it flatters music and it flatters painting. Music is supposed to be quasi-divine. We have an apotheosis of music. Painting, yes, expressive of the highest authority. And yet, all within and withunder the machine. So here we have it. To recover music, classical, decent music that is still tied to its natural end, in telos, right? Its character. This becomes very important today, so that we can recover the art of attending to the form of music, the concrete form of music. That art is painting. Painting will then allow us to develop, cultivate a good speech, which is a good music, a pure music that, yes, loses some of the musicality of what we call ordinarily music, but gains in the respect that it can defend the dignity, the natural divine dignity, irreducible dignity of music. Music as poetry. The book of poetry, an ancient Chinese text, begins with a reference to the origin of poetry. And this origin is tied to the problem of injustice. Something's wrong in our condition. In the world we are or find ourselves fallen into. And when there's something wrong, we begin tapping. Dissatisfaction. Then when tapping is not enough, we begin making another sound. When that's not enough, a further, and then we vocalize it. So we're responding to a condition that is inadequate, a condition we find ourselves as if fallen. Right? We don't belong here. And so we respond, we say something. We wouldn't say something if there were no problem. And so this response eventually develops into a kind of movement, a musicality, a music. Speech is originally musical. And then we've seen how this develops. So we end up with a distinction between ordinary music and speech. But this distinction should not be radicalized. That's why we have poetry, which is quite musical, which reminds us that ordinary speech is originally music, that it offers us not truth itself, but abstractions, mirrors of truth at best, and by nature. And this thanks to painting, the art of attending to the concrete, finite form, end of music, of the movement of the soul. Wherever the soul stops, there the painter attends to this, to the silence, and gives shape to that silence, and helps us see silence as, again, a stage for the articulation of music, an articulation that yields, right? This leads to the development of ordinary speech. But again, all of these, in fact, these three poles are intimately tied together. Music, the movement of the soul, painting, the music, the movement necessarily presupposes a form, a limit. So we attend to that limit, and in attending to that limit, music is somehow rarefied, right? Becomes more abstract, shall we say, and it more readily emerges as a mirror of truth. In speech, we have a kind of synthesis between music and painting. But we, again, should not be fooled into believing that that synthesis is ultimate. It is a merely provisional, symbolic even, synthesis. We have figures of speech in speech. A figure of speech never fully replaces an image that we can see, an image as the painter can offer us. So speech should not try to become critical scientific speech that instrumentalizes music and painting. It should not posit itself as the ultimate triumph of the self over music and painting, as if the self could become fully itself by abandoning music and painting and remaining encaged in an empty discourse, mechanistic discourse, a TED talk, where we have the apotheosis of the machine. This is the discourse of technocracy. What do we need music and painting for? We could use it for entertainment, for fueling ultimately the machine. This is an aberration, an abomination, a disgrace that is proper to our times. Anyone who is touched by genuine speech can see this. We are not in the machine, although we are raised to see ourselves in the machine. Let us return to good music as a condition for returning to good painting. No, good painting is not just good because I feel it is good, because today I like something, it makes me feel good. No. Good painting as a condition for good speech. Good speech needed to return fully to God.